we'll be discussing about models of information processing. Information processing is basically how our human mind perceives and stores information that are actually collected through our senses. So basically, various psychologists have come up with a few theories and models and experiments that attempts to explain how our human mind basically perceives things and stores it as an information to either be recalled immediately or be recalled at a later stage. This isn't exactly something biological, but this is like a framework, through which we are actually storing the information. So we can jump right to it, because all this chapter is all about some experiments and models that were proposed by various psychology researchers. So first model that we are going to see is Vaughan Normand's model of primary and secondary memory. Okay, so they have actually extended it from William James's dichotomy model, where the dichotomy model deals with a primary memory and a secondary memory. So basically, the memory is actually divided into a primary memory and a secondary memory. The primary memory being the first contender to actually receive the information, store it, and then giving it to the secondary memory. But how this model actually differs from William James's dichotomy model, that is Norman's model of primary and secondary memory, how it differs from William James's dichotomy model is that they are attempting to quantify the property of primary memory, like how much information it can hold and how much how much time it can hold and all that stuff. So, but in this theory, they are mainly focusing on primary memory, and they're basically terming it as short-term memory. So we won't be looking at primary memory and secondary memory as such. We'll be looking at short-term memory and long-term memory. Okay, since they're focusing on short-term memory, they have actually come up with a theory saying that short-term memory has a limited capacity, and it is similar to a vertical file, which means that it is their proposal was that a memory is like a limited storage capacity, where if you put some information in it, it is possible to be overflown, and new information needs more space, which basically makes our mind discard the old information. So that is their proposal, and they basically designed an experiment to actually prove this proposal. So as we can see over here, it is information is basically stored in slots, and if slot is not available for new information, then it should be replaced with the existing ones, right? Okay, now one of the main challenges in this model is that they have to actually prove that the short-term memory is more of a storage capacity rather than something that stores information that decays with time, which means that they have to prove that if an information is actually going into our mind, that information is more like it will be there for some time until a new information replaces it without any space, but not that it will actually decay in time. But so they conducted an experiment to find that out, and let's see that experiment, we'll understand it better. Okay, so this is the experiment. So basically, they presented to subjects a list of 16 digits at two paces. Like one pace is 1 word per second, and the second pace is 4 words per second. So it is like one is slow pace, and the second one is a fast pace. So they presented 16 digits to the subjects, and they were basically okay. If the same amount of information will be there in both the rates, that is, if one set of 16 digits is actually presented in 1 words per second, the same set of 16 digits will be presented at 4 words per second. Okay, so this is so they have to, if the short-term memory is a function of decay, which means that after some time the short-term memory is capable of forgetting the information, then the recall rates will be a lower rate. That is, so for example, if let's say that they are actually getting 1 word per second. Let's say that a word is actually forgotten within like 10 seconds. So after 10 seconds, the first letter that was actually given will be forgotten, right? So it will take 16 seconds in order to take all the words, and they only store like 10 digits per second, right? So that is about forgetting. So if it is an interference, then there is no difference in recall according to the presentation rate. They just need to focus on how many words that they can remember. Okay, I think I need to give more explanation on this 1 word per second thing. So basically, if a word is actually memorized, let's say that I actually give you a word, like let's say I give you a word dog, okay, and then I ask you to remember just this one information for a very long time. Even if I ask you like after like 1 week, you have attempted to remember this information, and even if I ask you like after 1 week, you'll be able to say that that day you actually said dog. Okay, so this actually is a very trivial example of how our mind is not a function of decay, but a function of storage capacity. For example, if I give you like 100 words to remember right now, there is absolutely no way that you will be remembering it within a week. I mean, not even the next minute or the next half an hour, you'll be able to remember the 100 words that I give you, right? So that is exactly what this experiment is trying to prove, that if the information that is presented is a function of decay, then with a slower pace of actually giving those letters, people will tend to forget what letters were actually coming first in the middle of the experiment itself. Okay, if it is 4 words per second, then people will be able to remember all the words that were actually shown to them, because it is being done at a very fast pace, and that it won't be forgotten before the experiment is over. So this is the experiment, and later experiments they actually gave 1 to 10 digits per second, and they observed that, and they basically formulated a same forgetting rate. Okay, so these were the results of their experiment. The results of their experiment is that, interference means the storage capacity, right? I mean, that is the word that is coming right now will interfere with the word that was actually stored in our memory earlier, if it doesn't have any space, right? So they actually proved that interference seems to be a greater factor than decay. That is, people tend to actually forget words because they don't have space in their memory in order to store it, rather than forgetting it in time, just as I said. So it means that the short-term memory runs out of storage capacity, and it forgets words over time. And in our textbook, they have actually given an example to illustrate this. So basically, when we are in a boring lecture and the teacher asks us to stand up and then ask us to tell what she was talking, we'll be able to vividly remember the last sentence that was spoken. It's because our brain is basically taking in all the sentences passively, but it is able to retain only the last sentence that it was paid no attention to, right? So, but the thing is that in reality, information is not just about interference. It does get lost in time too, but it is not as effective as that of the storage capacity. That is, it gets lost in time in a very long time. That is, if only a few words are presented to you, you will be able to remember it much better, right? So so in order to actually remember stuff and put it into long-term memory, we need to rehearse it, otherwise it will get lost in time. So we need to rehearse it, like say it again, like remember it, like categorize it and all that stuff. We need to do that to get it into long-term memory and to recollect it later. Okay, so that is about Norman and Vogg's theory. Does anyone have any questions in it? Hello.
Hi. Do you mean that the interference is the storage memory capacity?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I went by the meaning of the word, saying if we find a distraction in between of storing the data into the short-term memory, like you say some 10 phone number, and before I write it on a paper or tell it to somebody, if I talk about something else, I'll forget. That's what I thought is interference.
Oh, no, actually here, I have
I,
actually mentioned this over here itself. That is, it means that interference means storage capacity. That is interfering with the slot of already, present information in our in our memory storage.
Yeah. So what I could actually understand is, if let's say if there is a word which is already stored because of some other context, and if you are giving this particular word, then I think they both interfere in the memory and overlap with each other. I think that is what interference is.
No, no, no.
I mean,
Yeah. See, the thing is that if it actually got into there somewhere, what you might be suggesting is that it is there in long-term memory, because in short-term memory we will only be able to grasp things that are that is immediately stored in our memory right now. That is, if that for example, in that experiments, the short-term memory will only consist of the digits that were actually presented to the subjects. Everything else will be in the long-term memory, according to this experiment, according to this theory.
okay.
So the interference, we are strictly speaking about, something, the information that is replacing another information in the short-term memory only. That is in the immediate context.
Okay.
Okay. And anyone else have any questions? We can move to stage model then. Okay.
I have one.
Yeah, please.
What was the basis? Did they develop this theory with some operational definition or something like that, or what was the basis of this? Any?
No, they basically extended on William James's dichotomy theory, which was a basically vague representation of what a primary and a secondary memory is. And they just attempted to study more on the short-term memory, and that's what they did. Hello?
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. So the next one is the stage model, which was developed by Atkinson and Shiffrin. So according to this model, the memory is multi-staged, which is more or less like the last model that we have seen, but only with a small change, is that now before the information actually gets passed into the short-term memory, it basically is stored in a sensory memory directly from our senses. So basically, when we are actually capturing information from the environment, we can only do that through our senses, like basically the 4 input senses that we have, like touch, smell, sight, and all that stuff. So through the senses, it actually enter the second sensory memory, and in sensory memory, it will stay for some time. I'll tell you how much time. And then it moves into short-term memory through some process, and then it moves into long-term memory. So that is how this stage model. So it goes in stages. First stage is secondary memory, second stage is short-term memory, and third stage is long-term memory. So this is the diagram that they have given to illustrate it in our textbook. So first, we are actually getting the external stimulus, which is stored in the sensory memory. And if we don't pay any attention to it, basically all the things that we are getting from our senses will be stored in the sensory memory. And if we don't pay any attention to it, it will be forgotten from there. So after we do our initial processing, after we pay attention to it, it will go basically into the short-term memory. And in short-term memory, we have to in short-term memory, if we do not pay attention to it more, or rehearse it, or make it as important, categorize it, and all that stuff, it will basically be forgotten from that. So through repetition in short-term memory, if you keep repeating that information again and again, then it will go into long-term memory. And from the short-term memory, so basically human beings respond to any kind of stimuli from their short-term memory. So basically, first our sensory memory will pick up the information. It is still not processed to it. So once we actually process it in our short-term memory, we will respond to that stimuli. So sensory memory acts as a portal to all information that is stored in the memory. That is, first it will be stored in the sensory memory. Then memory obtained through sensory stimuluses like visual, auditory, touch, and smell. Like I said, that is the 4 input senses that we have. So how to get into the secondary memory is that first we should pay attention to the stimulus and automaticity. That is, if that stimulus is continually, being given to our senses. For example, if we are looking at something, in a split second, chances are that we did not see it and it did not go into our memory at all. Although our sensory memory did pick it up, we will not be able to actually process what we have seen and remember what we have seen. So automaticity is basically subjecting your senses to that particular stimuli for at least some time. Okay, so that's what automaticity means. Okay, so visual stimulus, that is things that we see, stays in secondary memory for about half a second before it goes into short-term memory. And auditory memory stays for about 4 to 5 seconds in sensory memory before going into the short-term memory. So okay, this is how actually humans are made, because we will be able to remember stuff that we see vividly in the next in the next short period of time, and we will be able to remember what we are hearing in for much longer time than what we are seeing. Because the thing is that if our short-term memory basically focuses on stuff that we are seeing, stuff that we already saw for more than a split second, then we won't be able to actually take in data that that is actually presented to us while we are actually looking at other things. So this is how visual stimulus stays about half a second, and auditory stimulus stays about 4 to 5 seconds in our memory before going into short-term memory, right? And short-term memory is the next stage in Atkinson's and Shiffrin's model after sensory memory, and it is also called as working memory. And short-term memory can actually hold information for 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, so it is also called as active and conscious memory. It is because it is a part of the memory that is being actively processed as new information is taken in, just as I said. So how to get into short-term memory is there are two types of ways in which information can go from sensory memory to short-term memory. One is called maintenance. These two are actually technical terms that those Atkinson and Shiffrin used. So one is the maintenance rehearsal, which means that repetition of this particular information over and over in our mind. Or in other words, just as I said, this if we keep subjecting our senses to that again and again, then it is called maintenance rehearsal, and it will basically make that information go into short-term memory. The other one is elaborative rehearsal. That is, it is entered short-term memory in some other way. For example, not all the information that we are processing needs to be coming from a stimulus. Although that is the case, but it need not be coming from a sensory stimulus. We can also be thinking about something else, like it's not necessarily recollecting also. We can be thinking about some concept, and then we can be forming new ideas, and that idea is basically going into the short-term memory. And it is repeated over and over, and then it goes into long-term memory. So that is what elaborative rehearsal is. So this is two ways to get into short-term memory: maintenance rehearsal and elaborative rehearsal. And the number of, according to them, the number of units that can be processed at any time in short-term memory is 5 plus 2. I have no idea why it's actually written. They have actually written plus over there. I think we have to like research it more. So it's 5 plus 2. That is 7 units can be processed at any time, right? So the next stage is long-term memory. One minute. Okay, apparently somebody else knows why it is actually written 5 plus 2. Does anyone know?
It could be 5 plus or minus 2, because previous class we had a 7 plus or minus 2. This could be, depending on people, could be 5 plus or minus 2. Just a thought, I have no clue.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have come across something similar earlier, saying that the average at plus or minus 2.
Minus, yeah. It was again that the magic 7 or something that we discussed about, wherein which had a plus or minus.
It is Miller's magic number.
Okay.
No, it is like the adult capacity for short-term memory is 5 plus 2 digit, and for children, lower. Children aged 5, it is 2 digit lower, And for children aged 9, it is 1 digit lower, like that.
Okay, so it's not about
It's saying that we can remember, we can process only 5 to 5 plus 2, like 5
plus
to
or minus
7 units of memory in one time, like maybe 5 things together in one go, not more than that.
minimum and maximum maybe.
Yeah, 5 plus 2 could be the maximum.
Okay, right. Okay, fine.
I request others to keep themselves on mute because there is a lot of background noise. Thank you, guys. Please carry on. Tarun.
Okay, so anyway, so next stage is the long-term memory. That is well-rehearsed information from the short-term memory is passed into the long-term memory. As we saw, I mean, there are various ways of rehearsing it. And the same type of rehearsal basically applies for the short-term memory to long-term memory also. And not so processed information, that is things that we don't pay much attention to, or things that we don't think about too much will be lost. So basically, in long-term memory, human mind always categorizes stuff. So everything is actually stored in categories. So if so, it's actually a great way to remember stuff. Also, if those who find it difficult to remember some stuff, try putting it into categories. Try making as many categories as possible in to organize the information, and it will definitely be stored in the long-term memory. I mean, I will be able to remember it much better. And in the long-term memory, things basically reside for days, months, or even a lifetime. Some people, like when they're really old, they will be able to remember what happened, things that transpired in their childhood when they're 9 years old and all that stuff. So information is capable of staying in our long-term memory for even a lifetime. Okay, so Bruner basically this is the quote that was given by Bruner. He's another psychologist. He also basically said that our human mind has a specialized system for categorizing information. So this is his quote: to perceive is to categorize, to conceptualize is to categorize, to learn is to form categories, and to make decisions is to categorize. So everything is actually categorizing. Whatever information that is there in our mind, it is because our human mind has automatically categorized it into something. So that's what long-term memory is. So okay. So any question on this model of information processing?
Nope, all good.
Okay. Okay. So now we actually saw that our memory. We actually saw that models in which the information is actually stored in our memory. Now this is like what kind of information and how it exactly it is organized in our memory. I mean, what kind of information is processed how in our memory. So first is episodic memory, and then comes the semantic memory. Episodic memory means like we actually remember situations, we remember stuff like as a sequence, that is one thing occurring after another thing. So episodic memory forms like remembering situations, events, stories, and sequential events. So it's based on and according to Tulving, it is based on personal experiences and specific events and personal biases. But it is not necessarily like that. Like anything that is not personal experience may also be remembered as episodic memory if it occurs as a sequence, right? And also it is, and according to Tulving, it is also circumstantial. That is, it is not used for processing new information, which can also be taken as a grain of salt, with a grain of salt, because we can also process new information that we can remember it as an episodic memory. So this was actually done in 1973 or 74, not sure. So it was, so after that many revisions have been done with episodic memory, and it's not really circumstantial, but more or less it is, right? So that is episodic memory, that is sequential events. And next is semantic memory. Semantic memory, a lot of research have been done with semantic memory, because it is basically storing general and abstract information. and it is recalled independently of how it was learned. So basically, it is not, it does not depend on how it learned. But for episodic memory, how you are recollecting basically depends on how you learned it. For example, if you had a trauma with some incident, whenever you actually recall that incident, there will be trauma in your head. So that is how it was. The trauma was how it was. You learned that episodic memory. So trauma will be how you recollect it. And I mean, trauma is just an example. There can be other personal experiences also. But episodic memory can only be recalled using how it was learned. But semantic memory can be recalled independently of how it was learned. And by abstract information, I mean anything that actually doesn't follow a sequence of events, anything that is like pure data or that requires processing in our mind. Mathematics is a great example for it. So language is also another great response. Another great example. For example, we have absolutely no idea, how we learned. Basic words and all we know, like A for apple, B for ball. That's how we learned it. But other words, we have no idea how we learned that word. When we first actually came across that word, we have no idea. But that's an abstract information that is present in our head, and that is basically what semantic memory is. Okay, so it focuses mostly on understood things.
Yeah.
And as I said, it is concepts, strategies, and other structures for encoding new information. So how our human mind is actually storing the new information is also responsible for, semantic memory is also responsible for that. That is our brain would have actually created a framework for, encoding new information. That is how can we remember it, or what the new information means to us, something like that. So that is what semantic memory is.
I
Yeah.
would like to give an example, Tarun, on this. Like you just talked about a patient with trauma. So whatever that person see, okay, that's an actual event. That is more of an episodic memory, which he or she is seeing. But semantic memory is what she is interpreting with that. So we can even take an example of an accident on the road. We see it through our eyes, but the way we interpret it, or the way we take out meaning on it, is more semantic. Episodic is what we see, and the meaning which we get out of it is semantic, and it could be different for different people. People can see the actual event the way it is, but the meaning of that event would be different.
Yeah, yes,
Different people.
that's correct. Yeah, but also, semantic memory need not necessarily be a byproduct of episodic memory. It can be like something like really abstract also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that is episodic and semantic memory. And episodic and semantic memory are really, not that different. So what these researchers did, Abbott and Hewitt, what they did is they combined both of them together and formed something known as a declarative memory. So they called both semantic memory and episodic memory are called declarative memories. That is memories that store the information about which we can talk or be verbalized, right? So they're called declarative memories. And according to them, the other types of memories other than declarative memories are procedural memories. That is how to knowledge of anything. That is how you can cook something, how you can make something, and how you can fly a kite, how you can paint. All those are procedural memory. They do not actually categorize into semantic or episodic memory, because basically they are not a sequential. Although they do come as form of a sequential instruction, they are not something. They're not something sequential to be remembered as an episode. So procedural memory is a how-to knowledge, and it does require automaticity, but it's not limited to that. For example, once we learn cooking, we will be able to we need not actually recollect things in mind. Okay, this is what we need to do next, this is what we need to do next. We'll automatically put all the ingredients together when the time comes, and then we'll do that. So automaticity is a byproduct of procedural memory, but it is not limited to that. And learned skills, ability to recall instruction, all these actually come under procedural memory. right? And next one is imagery. So with declarative memory and procedural memory, they also put imagery, which is related to remembering pictures, so imagery also follows the same rule as semantic and episodic memory. The difference between that is an image versus a video. Like an image, you basically semantically interpret it. For example, if you see an image of a dog, you immediately think about dog, what a meaning of a dog is, and what the dog means to you and all that stuff. And episodic memory is basically an image that is being showed as a sequence, which is basically a video. So according to Abbott and Hewitt, these are the three types of memory structures through which our brain remembers information. So anyone has any questions in this?
I'm good. No.
Okay.
Around the last point, can you please repeat that? I didn't catch that. How image and video, they are like semantic and episodic. Episodic video is sequential. I understood that.
Yeah.
Okay. Image is a single one. That means how is it semantic?
Okay. The thing is that both image and video actually both have some sort of episodic and semantic things to it. For example, a particular just one image, when you see it, you basically interpret it semantically, you understand the meaning of it, and you know that you're actually, when you see a picture of a dog, you know that you're looking at a dog and what a dog is, what it does, and how much the dog means to you. So that is actually semantic memory. Okay. So episodic is also, you're seeing a sequential of pictures and you're trying to relate how the previous picture is actually related to the next picture, and how the next picture is related to the next one.
I understood. Thank you.
Right. So that is imagery. Okay. There's more information, that is given in the textbook, which is basically the difference between memory storage and the memory is that the data being stored is the memory, and the the difference between memory and storage is that memory is the data being stored, and storage is a structured component that contains the memory. So you can actually think of it as a box and something that is stored inside the box. So something that is stored inside the box is memory, and storage is something that contains that memory. So researchers have found that these two are totally different things that exist in our mind. So, and also they have also found that simply indicating how long an item has been retained does not necessarily reveal where it is located in the structure of the memory. This actually, I will come back to this point later, because there is a model that actually says how long, that actually classifies an information based on how long an item has been retained in our memory. So I'll come back to that later. And third one is that information can directly move from sensory memory to long-term memory. Like in case of the second one, Shiffrin and Atkinson's that we saw that from sensory memory, it is moving to short-term memory, and from short-term memory it is going to long-term memory. It did not necessarily be like that. They found that in recent studies. That information can move directly from sensory memory to long-term memory. That is, we need not actually process it currently, right? So that is another information, and we still have some more time. Yeah. So next is level of recall. This was done by P.I. Zinchenko, and this is basically his hypothesis. And verbatim, it is words encoded by deep means would be retained in incidental memory better than if it is encoded by superficial means. And by superficial, he says that something that that does not actually mean anything to us, or that does not actually pertain to any context that we are currently in, is superficial, right? And you'll understand the difference between both of them when we actually see the experiment. Basically, memorability of words were profoundly influenced by the goals of the subject. So this was the experiment that Zinchenko basically made, and he gave the participant 10 series of 4 words. And the example is like how you see over here: house, window, building, fish. So these are the 4 words, and he gave 10 of them. And he asked the participants to perform 3 different tasks with all those words. And they are, first task is identify the word with that has the different meaning from the first word. For example, house and fish does not relate at all to each other. So that is one of the tasks. The other task is that identify the word that has a concrete connection with the real word. That is first word. That is, it should have some kind of connection to it. They should both be of they should both be a thing, and they should have some real world connection to it. And third one was identify the word that has logical connection with the first word. So in this thing, a house is a building, which is basically a semantic information, right? A house is a building. When we see a house, we see a building. Okay, so a concrete information is a house, and it has a window. And logical information is that a house is a building, a semantic information. So these 3 different tasks were given with 10 series of 4 words. And after they basically classified that, they were given an interrupting task for some time, like a coffee break, and they were allowed to chit chat and all that stuff. And after that, they were asked to recall the items that followed the first word. So how many ever words that so they were basically given the first word, and how many ever words they can remember from that particular series, they need to be able to tell it. Okay, and so basically he highlighted the properties of this experiment, which makes it effective, is that different goals towards the same material were given. For example, here we can actually see that there are 3 goals in it, right? And also these 3 goals focus on the fact that the participant have to actually analyze the meaning of every word. They cannot just skip ahead of words and all that stuff. So they have to examine the meaning of every word. So, and the results he found out was the logically connected words. That is, in our example, it is house and building, right? The logically connected words, they were able to record more than concretely connected words. And concretely connected words, they were able to record more than words with no connection or opposite connection, right? So that is exactly how our human mind thinks. So when we see a house, we see a building, and we are like, oh, okay, building was there in that list, or we can recall building. So that's how we humans logically connect, categorize, basically, as I said, words in our own mind. And we were able to remember logically connected words, and these things have to be remembered from the long-term memory, as we saw. So according to him, logically connected words were remembered more than concretely connected words, and concretely connected words were remembered more than words with opposite connection, right? And next is, okay, anyone has any doubts on this?
No, clear.
Okay, so the next model that we are going to see is levels of processing model that were formulated by Craig and Lockhart. Okay, so what they proposed is that incoming stimuli. Okay, so this is the experiment that they put. I'm sorry, something came up. 1 minute. Sorry, there was something disturbing my desktop. Now it's clear. So yeah, so levels of processing. Okay, so what they're saying is that incoming stimuli is subjected to a series of analysis, starting with shallow sensory analysis and proceeding to a deeper, more complex and abstract semantic analysis. That is, whenever we actually receive a stimuli, the extent to which we can actually remember basically depends on how much we are actually, how much deeper it is going in our, how much deeply we are analyzing it. So first one is actually a shallow sensory analysis. That is, we are basically looking at the features. Like let's say that we are actually looking at a tiger. we are looking at the features. Okay, it has stripes, it has black stripes, it has yellow stripes. So that is a primitive level analysis that we are doing, which actually doesn't stay much into our mind. And as we go further, we will be like thinking, okay, a tiger can hunt, tiger can tiger behaves like a cat, and more semantic analysis like a tiger belongs to the cat family, and the tiger must hunt to find its prey, and how endangered tigers are. So the more we analyze any concept, the more we basically remember stuff. That is according to Craighen Lockhart. So earlier level is sensory and featural analysis. Deeper level is pattern recognition and extraction of meaning. So we basically put together, the features that we have analyzed using our senses, and we form patterns. Like I said, a tiger has stripes, and more stripes, yellow and black stripes. So first, in feature analysis, we have just seen the color yellow, we have just seen the color black, and we have just seen stripes. So we put together to form a pattern saying yellow and black stripes. So that is a deeper level of analysis that we are having. And then we are extracting the meaning from that, saying that, okay, tigers have yellow and black stripes, right? And still deeper is that subject's long-term association. Oh, okay, tigers are endangered. And why are they endangered? What can we do about it? So the more and more we analyze it, we'll be able to remember it more, right? And yeah, that's exactly what's given over here, right? And the problems with this levels of processing is that we are capable of perceiving at meaningful levels before we analyze information at a more primitive level. So it didn't really stick with the researchers at that time, because they're saying that we can actually feel bad for as the example that I gave, it's just an example, that we can actually feel bad for the tiger being endangered even before we actually process its information. Like we see it and then we'll be like, oh, that poor thing, something like that. So we are capable of perceiving at meaningful levels before we analyze information at a more primitive level. So it is more like spread of processing rather than levels of processing. So instead of actually analyzing at in levels, we will be analyzing, we'll be analyzing altogether in a spread. Like highly familiar stimuli are more likely to have processed at deeper level than less meaningful stimuli, which means that if we are already familiar with that concept, our human mind will not be starting the analysis from the first level and bringing it to the last level. We'll be able to we'll be able to actually process that at a deeper level from the first itself. Like you see a tiger and then you feel, oh, it's poor, like that. So it need not all the time cross all the levels of processing. So the criticism, some criticisms were given by psychology researchers for levels of processing model, and they are it seems to say a little more than meaningful events are well remembered. Like, so the thing is that it is a mundane conclusion, meaning they're just, if you see the entire thing, entire concept of levels of processing, all they're saying is that things that we have analyzed more, things that we find more meaningful, we are actually remembering it a lot, which is not really a insightful thing that we are knowing very new, because we already know it, and it does not actually say anything new information, or it's not and it is also vague and generally untestable. Why? Because we don't know what the levels of processing are. They're just saying, as we can see over here, they're just saying earlier level, deeper level, and still deeper level, and they are not even saying how deep it is and what the depth of the analysis is, and exactly how many levels of analysis are there. They're not saying anything like that. So it's vague and untestable. And as I said, it is circular in that events that we well remembered are designated, deeply processed with no objective and the independent index of depth available, which means that they are not saying what exactly the depth of levels of processing is. They're just saying that it's processed in levels. That's it. So those are the criticism that were actually given for Craighen Lockhart's theory, levels of processing. And yeah, so this is an example for that. When we are actually proofreading a passage, we just skim over, the passage, like, I mean, we just read the words and then we don't really pay much attention to it. We'll be like, oh, okay, this is fine. And when we are actually reading a passage, to understand it for the first time and to understand what exactly it is trying to convey, we do a more, elaborate semantic processing of the passage. And in the first case, we are only doing a shallow processing of the passage. And after subsequent studies were done, it was found that the theory states that the stimuli processed through sequence of stages were abandoned, and theory regarding the processing through sensory processing before semantic processing was retained. So out of all these theories that we have seen right now, the theories that said that it was actually processed in sequence of stages. Like in the first one, it was like primary memory and secondary memory. In the second one, it was like sensory memory, primary memory, and secondary memory. So all those actually theories were abandoned. It is, the information is not processed as stages. So what was retained is that sensory processing will be done before semantic processing. That is, our senses will be able to pick up, some information from the surrounding before actually analyzing the meaning of that. And that's exactly what they are saying. After the complete picture of what information has come to us, only we are able to do a more analyzed semantic processing, analyzed meaningful processing of that particular information. Okay, this is the difference between boxes in the head theory and LOP theory. That is, LOP theory is levels of processing theory. We just saw that right now, Craik and Lockhart's. And boxes in the head theory are Waugh and Norman's short-term memory theory and Atkinson-Shiffrin's stage theory. So they call it boxes in the head theory because, that's exactly what they said it is. It's like boxes like short sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. So this is boxes in the head theory. The difference is that the difference is basically how each of these theories are actually dealing with the term rehearsal. So in boxes in the head theories, rehearsal of information is short-term memory that serves as a function of transferring to long-term memory. That is, from short-term memory to long-term memory, if you have to pass an information, you need to rehearse that information, right? But in levels of processing theory, rehearsal is either maintaining information at one level of analysis or elaborating information by processing it to the deeper level, right? So it is, maintained at one level or, so basically, if there is a deeper level of analysis, rehearsal is actually required to actually maintain that information in that same level of analysis, or elaborating information by processing it to a deeper level. So that is the difference between the boxes in the head theories and LOP theory. So from this, I can actually.
Could you please explain that again?
Yeah. Okay. So okay, the difference between the boxes in the head theories, that is Waugh and Norman's, and levels of processing theory, is that how they actually deal with the word rehearsal. That's all they are saying over here. So in boxes in the head theories, rehearsal means like we are taking something from short-term memory to long-term memory. For example, we are, let's say that we are analyzing a concept in our mind, and we keep rehearsing that concept in our short-term memory, and eventually it ends up in the long-term memory, and that's it. So that's what they are actually doing it, and it doesn't actually stay in the short-term memory, right? It goes to the long-term memory. But in levels of processing theory, they are basically defining rehearsal as analyzing so that the information stays in that level of analysis, or analyzing it more. That is what they're saying by elaborating, analyzing more by pushing it to a deeper level of analysis. So either it will stay in that level of analysis or deeper level of analysis. That's how they're defining the term rehearsal. That's it.
Okay, yeah, cool, understood. Thank you.
Yeah, so from this I can actually take tomorrow. So we just have a couple more, slides. I'll take from this tomorrow. Thank you. Any more doubts on any of the topics that was covered today?
No, Tarun, it was really good. Thank you so much. You explained it so well.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Tarun. It was really good.
It was really nice, Tarun.
Yeah, this making points in PPT is like really helpful. They summarize.
Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll
And
share this PPT, after the class.
Yeah, you can finish it off tomorrow and then you can share.
Yeah, sure.
In fact, it reflected your clarity of thoughts. I'm not